away and we're going to see where it goes. This is so exciting, Matt. I'm pumped. I'm just excited that we were able to get you on the earlier side of things, just because I'm curious about the sort of first feels about the semester starting
Yeah.
and everything. All right, so we're live. That's fantastic. It's happening. I'm going to close this and I'm going to get back to Zoom over here so I can see you. So I want to welcome everyone this week to So Ask Us. I'm really excited to be talking to Professor Matthew Godfrey, who teaches marketing for the Isenberg School of Management at UMass. Matt, thank you for coming on. This is really great.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I'm
Yes,
excited to talk to you.
yes. So, uh, full disclosure for everyone who's watching, Matt and I have gotten to work together a little bit in the past. So last semester, I think it was just last semester.
It was. It seems
Um,
like a long time ago, but it
doesn't
was
it seem
only
like so
only a few months
long
ago.
ago? It is, I mean, it's just wild that all of this kind of happened in the middle of everything,
hmm
right? So, Matt, your work, among other things, focuses not only on placemaking and marketing, but also specifically on customer experience and insights. And the
Yeah.
class that I got to kind of be, the Mill District was the subject for last semester, was a customer insights class. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Can you just share a little bit for folks watching what that means, what a class like
Sure.
that is
Yeah.
teaching students?
Well, in marketing, we kind of try to give a well-rounded, view of the market, of branding, of customer experience, and a lot of it is focused on, data analytics. Obviously, is really
Right.
important, and but sometimes with all of that data, you kind of can get disconnected from the human experience of what it means to have a
Mm,
relationship with a brand,
totally.
how people feel when they go into a store or when they you know shop online with their friends or whatever. And so my class is a deep dive into like the human experiences of being a customer. And I kind of see myself as a sociologist of
Yeah.
markets and marketing, and so I try to give my students sort of this social and cultural view of who people are and how they experience the world. So we do a lot of
Right.
qualitative research.
Right.
So like for example, with your project we worked on, they
Yeah.
were going into stores and different places around the state and in the community, trying to figure out what makes a really good customer experience, like what makes it a community sort of experience.
Right.
um, and then they're interviewing people, and they're going online and collecting data. So it's a really sort of a different perspective than a lot of the classes that they're used to. But I think a lot of students find it as like a nice way to really ground themselves in real life, and kind of develop some empathy for the people that
Mm,
are going to be their customers in whatever
right.
you know government or company or whatever they end up working with. So
Right.
that's kind of what we do.
That's I think that's awesome. I love that so much because it does feel sort of germane to the whole question. I'm going to take this really big, really fast. I'm sorry. But the whole question of capitalism and what capitalism is about. And I think it's
uh,
really hard. And certainly not just the buying and selling of things.
yeah,
There are a lot
yeah,
of other elements to it. But, if we're going to build our system around this concept, how far does that concept go,
yeah,
and how
yeah,
far into human nature and experience do we take it? And
yeah.
you and I were talking right before we hopped on about placemaking, because
Uh-huh.
we both
Uh,
work in placemaking and have done a lot of research in that. And the trend for so long um, was about the experiential, right? That was sort of becoming a larger part of what are we marketing? What are
mhm.
we offering? How do you get people to come to a store in person versus
Sure.
online?
Yeah.
That whole push pull. Um, And so then all of a sudden to have COVID happen
Yeah.
and have the in-person aspect sort of not fully taken away, because we still want to be talking
Yeah.
about it, but all of a sudden it has this recovery element
Right.
to the
And it means
conversation.
something different all of a sudden too.
Yes.
Yeah.
How has that impacted your research and how you're thinking about it
Yeah.
before you even get to the classroom, how you're thinking about it for your own work?
Yeah. I mean, it has caused me to ask new kinds of questions. And like you were talking about at that high level of what does capitalism mean? What are businesses? And I think that, teaching this class and doing this kind of research is a reminder to me that it's, even though we pay attention to the economics of businesses and markets and of capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
it's really still a social system
Right.
held together by different agreements that have been, reached over
Mm-hmm.
time, and they may or may not always be, helping
Yeah.
everybody, and things like that, and they people definitely experience the market in different ways depending on their backgrounds and
Right.
lives. Um, and so I think, like you said, over the past couple decades, there was sort of a shift or a pushback against just purely efficient kinds of, customer experiences where you go to a store, you buy something, you get out, or you order it online and you get the cheapest, you can, maximizing your utility. But people sort of missed out on that experience of being around other people. And that, I think, initially that's what, suburban shopping malls were supposed to be. Were supposed to be this community center, but they were so
Right.
removed from all of the people that they didn't really live up to that. And so, like, places like the Mill District and other places where I've worked with, they're trying to kind of create that sense of an in-person experience. And so now suddenly they're kind of that experience of being around a lot of people, people watching, seeing people who are different than you, who are outside of your social circle, is considered kind of dangerous. And it's difficult because there obviously is a risk of passing on a virus. And so we had to kind of rethink what it is that people are seeking out when they try to have these kinds of experiences. Um, and, is there a way to create that sense of community and social connection in a safe way where people can still connect with people who are different than them or who are outside of their immediate families and social circles? Um, I don't feel like I have all the answers yet, but I mean, like, for one,
No.
you're doing these kinds of interviews, and you're talking with people and trying to bring them together virtually. I think that helps a lot. Um, and I've been watching how a lot of times when I go into a customer service kind of an experience in a store, sometimes the employees or the owners of the store will kind of go above and beyond in terms of
Yeah.
making sure
Connecting.
people feel like they belong, and it's not just behind a mask or behind barriers at the grocery store checkout. It can feel really impersonal.
Right.
So one of the questions I'm asking is, like, how do you still make these sorts of interactions personal and you know enjoyable, and not just, it's important to be safe. Obviously, we have to be safe and we have to look out for each other in a public health kind of a sense. But um, watching all of these emotional and mental health struggles people are going through kind of reinforces to me the need to still have connections. And so that's like a huge challenge for business owners. I think especially small business owners who are the owner and the service provider and everything, trying to make things work economically, but also keep people safe. And then on top of that, keeping that sense of community and making people even feel more welcome is such a challenge. But I think it's going to become more and more important as this sort of situation drags on for an extended time. Are you
Heather,
kind of seeing that those challenges in the, the
Yes.
businesses you're working with and in your own, areas?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there's really, I think, a push towards a hybridization that was not something that business owners
Hmm.
necessarily even had room for.
Uh-huh.
And what it makes me think of, is the sort of trending towards online that was
Mhm.
already happening.
Yeah.
And then also, along with that, the rise of social media, more people choosing to connect
Right.
online, feeling more connected online, shopping online, learning about things online, all of the algorithms that were then just bringing, right to your news feed or your
Hmm.
Instagram feed, the products that the algorithm already knew you
Hmm.
were looking for. And so the
Hmm.
ease of that. And so this idea that all of a sudden, on top of it being challenging to get people to walk, bike, get in their car, get on public transportation, come to your store, connect with you, talk to an employee, learn more, pay a little bit more, on top of all of that, all of a sudden, there is that sense of um, needing to make people feel safe, needing to
Hmm.
take that extra step to make sure that you are able to serve people outdoors, or you're able to meet the
Yeah.
concerns of someone before they even have it. So it really like piled on a lot
Yeah.
for business owners and for anyone who was used to having to conduct business in person and maybe had been resistant. i
Yeah.
I will admit, I even was a little resistant to social media, and I've said this before, and I feel a little bit like a traitor to my generation and my professional background. But social media for me was, I wasn't that into it. I felt like it was trying to make something personal, but was actually making things impersonal, and we were
Hmm.
listening less, even though we were supposed to be able to hear more.
Right.
And now I actually feel like social media has come a little bit more into the promise that it gave at the outset, because it has been so necessary to stay connected. I
Yeah.
mean, Zoom is almost part of social media at this
Yeah.
point, just the ability to connect with people and keep talking.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm curious, from stepping sort of back towards the student
Yeah.
experience, now that you're teaching remotely entirely. I mean, this sort of interrupted our semester last year,
Right. Yeah.
and we moved to a remote model. And one thing for me in working with your students is that I had already had an opportunity to establish a certain, energetic connection. I was
Hmm.
excited by them. I had gotten to meet them all in
Right. Yeah.
person, I think just once.
I think
Um,
once, yeah, late January, early February,
yeah.
somewhere around there. Hmm.
And even that was enough to establish, I came in and I talked about the Mill District. We had awesome conversations in 2 different classes. And so I had an opportunity to establish some connectivity with them. And
Yeah.
then when we went remote, it wasn't hard to keep
Yeah.
that going.
Yeah.
But now that it's entirely remote, you don't have an opportunity to establish that in-person connection.
Yeah.
How do you stay connected? How has this changed the
Yeah.
way that you're teaching?
I thought about that a lot, because those first like 2 or 3 weeks really do kind of help set
Yeah.
the stage for the kind of relationships you'll have with the students later on, and how engaged they'll be with
Mm-hmm.
learning the material, with talking to each other. Um, Now I feel like in some ways I'm fortunate because I get to teach students who are usually juniors, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
seniors. So they're already sort of involved and they understand the college experience. I think it'd be totally different with freshmen who've this is their first experience
Yes.
with that and establishing that. And that'd be a totally different challenge. But for me, I feel like, some things that I would do in person was just make sure to spend a lot of time doing introductions that are sort of getting people to explain where they're coming from, who they are to each other, and then also sending me some personal descriptions of who they are and what they hope to get out of the class.
Oh, that's very
And so
cool.
I just transferred that to an online setting with different kinds of, survey platforms, and just letting students introduce themselves on Zoom. Um, but and then the other thing that I'm finding I have to do is engage more deeply with their backgrounds and pull it into the class. And so if
Yeah.
I'm talking about, the importance of qualitative observations of the customer experience and how that can supplement, big data analytics.
Mm-hmm.
If I know somebody in the class is, um, their career and their maybe internship experience is around that quantitative data analytics, then I can say, well, I know you have this experience. Like, how does that
Yeah.
relate to you? And
Really
I've been
engaged.
trying to sort of pull people in based on their own experiences
Yeah.
into these live classes or on Blackboard discussions, which definitely takes more effort and work. It's harder to do,
Right.
but so far, I mean, I also ask students to use their video,
You
and
do.
sometimes it's hard because I understand, like, internet connections aren't always good, or
Right.
some students might have to take a call from work or something like that if they happen to have,
Wow.
they have all kinds of different experiences, that they're kind of, or backgrounds. So I'm flexible, but I found that by asking for video and setting that sort of class culture up, we've actually had probably the same amount of interaction as we had in person. It's just
That's
you have these
amazing.
like screens of people. The joke is it's like kind of like Hollywood Squares, where you've got these like heads in a
Right.
grid up on your screen, and you see them popping up.
Yeah.
But there's sort of a culture getting formed, I hope anyway, in my classes, where students can um, feel comfortable to either just jump in and talk, or to send me a private message during the discussion asking for clarification about a question.
Yeah.
um, and so that's started to happen in a, I guess, a better and more interactive way than I expected.
Right.
I kind of had low expectations in some ways. I wanted this to be like, put everything I could into this to
Yeah.
make it good, but I didn't want to expect a perfect semester, because it's just such a it's an unpredictable time. But I've
Yeah.
been really pleasantly surprised at how the students have really kind of stepped up and interacted, and they've told me they love the live sessions.
That's so
And
awesome to
so
hear, because
they
it
love having
really,
that.
yeah, it could go either way, right? And it's great to be getting that feedback already, because this is the third week of
This is
classes,
week
is that
three,
right?
yeah.
Week three.
Yeah.
And so I know you said right before we hopped on that it has actually improved your class in some ways. Can
Oh,
you
yeah.
talk about that a little bit?
So, it's hard to say whether it's improved the outcomes in terms of learning and things like that, but one thing that I've done is moved away from a long lecture kind of a format, which is never actually, that effective of a way to teach. I always tried
No
to
judgment.
I tried to have discussion and things, but in person it's easier to sustain
Yes.
a long lecture as sort of interactive, and
Yeah.
online it's just not.
No.
And I tried. I learned that quickly last semester, when we just suddenly, like, from before spring break to after spring break, we had to be online, and so
Right.
I didn't have as much time to adapt. But now I've tried to kind of, I've been creating, short video introductions to the key concepts to sort of accompany the reading, um, and given them hopefully resources and tools to sort of teach themselves before they get to class.
Mm.
Um, it also helps that I require them to post a discussion about that as part of their grade before class.
Yes.
So that helps. But it's amazing to come to a class where all the students, pretty much all the students, have an understanding of the basics of these concepts, so then we can, like, really apply them rather
Right.
than just teaching the basics. I think it's something I should have been doing more in the
Mm.
past anyway, and I plan to just keep that,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
use
that's so
that even when we're in
interesting.
person, just to use that same.
Yeah.
interactive format to prepare them for class. And I know other, faculty in the marketing department and across campus they're doing similar things like that, where they're,
Yeah.
breaking these longer class periods up into shorter little segments that students can
Hmm.
digest more easily. And so there's a lot of experimentation going on, I think, and
Yeah.
hopefully we don't stay like this forever. But I
Right.
also hope that the good things that we learn can like help make the experience better
Yeah.
when we get to go back to in person. I think a lot of these things have improved the class in some ways. It sort of pushed me
Yeah.
to get out of my comfort zone and spend some more time preparing
Yeah.
new ways to teach. So
Because it is so interesting, and I think I can definitely attest to the fact that at least with the students last year in your classes, they were very involved. I mean, the number of questions when I came in and presented on the
yeah,
Mill District, the number of questions, the directions that they took the discussion. I mean, I can only imagine how heightened that interactivity has been through this new style of teaching. If you're saying it's sort of bringing people in more prepared to
yeah,
be in discussion, more prepared to push back on one another, more prepared to share new insights, new opinions, it
yeah.
really must make for a very robust conversation.
The conversations really are good. And I think that the only thing that is still a challenge, obviously, is that it's hard for students to relate to each other still because it
Sure.
takes longer online. And
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll ever be quite the same. But hopefully, as we start working in smaller groups more often
Mhm.
on their group project, they'll start to develop friendships and be able to, like you said, relate to each other and learn from their different experiences. But they are, they're responding to each other in the online discussion forums on the Blackboard learning
Right.
management system I have for the class. Um, and part of it, I think, like I said before, is that I I have a lot of the grade based on participation. I think
Hmm.
even more this semester than I did in the past
Really.
because I
Yeah.
really I wanted students to engage in multiple different ways. If they have a challenge with live classes, synchronous learning for whatever reason, they can do it in this other way.
Yeah.
And but I think so far it's been working pretty well. So
Yeah.
we'll see. Maybe,
I
maybe you
know.
can talk to me at the end of the semester, and
We'll have you back on.
it would be an interesting interview to
Yeah.
interview my students in December and see if
Yes.
they agree with me.
I would love to. Ooh, maybe they could do a group interview. That would be so cool. We could work that into the
Might be a different
curriculum.
thing if you don't have me here, and
Right.
you might get a more
Ooh.
honest set of
Oh, we're gonna,
feedback.
yeah, yeah, we're really gonna get the whole honest reflection because it is, I mean, when I think about kind of my own grad school experience, I guess is the closest thing I can point to, even though that was a few years ago now at this point. But there's something about having the time, understanding that your students probably have all different things pulling on their time, but the time as a student to be in a classroom and talk about just the new trends that are happening or
Mhm.
past data and really talk with one another
Mhm.
is something that, when we get out into the professional world, we really have to pursue that very carefully if that's something that we want to keep up. And I know for
Yeah.
myself through this time, and I'm sure for you as well, because we're accustomed to a certain level of research, working in a field like placemaking that is a constantly evolving field,
Mhm.
marketing and customer insights certainly always evolving, but I would venture to say, and you can feel free to correct me because this is not my background, there was probably a good stint there where you were teaching some tried and true methodology. And now the customer experience is front and center of
Yeah.
change, right? That customer experience is not what it's been. You can pull a little bit from the past data and research, but
Mhm.
for the most part, your students are now on the cutting edge of something. And so
Yeah.
their thoughts and their explorations and their input are right up there with any other customer insight marketing firm out
Yeah.
there that's putting its whole team
Yeah.
on what do we do about this.
Right.
So how do you sort of connect your students in with the real world, as in
Yeah.
like what's happening in real time, so that their ideas and their reflections are helping to impact what we're all trying
Yeah.
to sort of suss out right now?
Yeah. Well, I loved what you said about how the students are really on the cutting edge because we're all trying to figure this out.
Right?
And so I think like a lot of professors probably have tailored a lot of the discussion and assignments around the COVID-19 situation and sort of like talking about
Exactly.
these things. I know a lot of professors are also talking about the social justice conversations and things that are going on. There's like a lot of stuff in the world and in the culture that we're in right now that gives students a way to apply their learning to something that they can see like firsthand.
Yeah.
And so I tailored like for this class in the past, I've always had like a hands-on approach to their assignments. But I thought it was a natural fit to focus our research and the questions and the analyses on the COVID-19 customer experience and sort of
Yeah.
how is it different and how can especially local business and service providers create something that is new but still provides that kind of experience that different kinds of people want.
Yeah.
Um, and so in the past, I would assign different kinds of, research projects where they would go out on the field and take notes, or they would do interviews.
Yeah.
I didn't want to put my students at risk either of like,
Yeah.
should I tell them to go to this particular place or that? I used to send them to the post office, for example, and they were all required to mail a postcard, which most of them had never done. Um,
Wow.
and so, and they had to take detailed notes about all the things they saw and felt and heard.
Whoa.
But I thought, it seems like such a mundane thing, but maybe that's not a great place to send students
Right
right now,
now.
especially if they wouldn't normally go there.
Right. Right.
And so they're taking field notes, logs instead of their everyday experiences and keeping track of
Hmm.
how they feel when they go into a store and everyone's wearing masks or the
Yeah.
ways that they see customers interacting with each other. And so they're living their lives, but they're just sort of being more aware and observant and taking notes
Yeah.
and weekly sort of submitting those. And then we discuss those and analyze them in class. And so that way students can see
Hmm.
each other's experiences. And what's really cool now is that the students are all over the country. Uh,
Oh, right.
and and so
Right.
it's a different experience, even for someone who's in Western Mass versus someone in the Boston area versus someone on the Cape or someone in California or whatever. Now
Yeah.
they can, someone can say, well, I saw this happening. And then someone
Mhm.
else can say, I saw this happening and that happening. And we can start to pull together patterns
Wow.
across all these different areas, which is kind of unique and different compared to
Yeah.
what we had before with the students doing their research for the most part around the local Amherst area, just because
Yeah. Sure.
we had the opportunity to be in person, but we were also kind of limited to being in person. So, and I think just stressing to the students that their answers are, important and meaningful, and they can really help business owners because no one really knows the answers to the questions of what the COVID-19 experience should be or how
It's
what should we
happening right
do
now.
after hopefully soon we'll have the ability to return to interactions that are a little more normal, but I think it will have changed things in some way fundamentally. And so what does that look like in the future? um, so students, I think, they're already thinking about this and unfortunately I think stressing about it too. And it's causing, it's difficult to go through a situation as a young adult where your whole world is sort of like getting turned upside down, but to be able to talk about it in class and sort of like share experiences and hear other people's, I think can be helpful.
Yeah,
of it.
absolutely. And I think your point earlier about the sort of sociological aspect of it and creating this space where students can talk with one another and you can talk with them as well, just more about what they're feeling and really getting into the customer insight subject from a real personal experience. I think in part because COVID and social justice are so much about our sort of initial reaction to something or response to something. I thought about that a lot, actually. Just incidentally, over this holiday weekend, I was on the Cape. It was the first time that I had gone anywhere and had any kind of tourist experience since COVID happened. And even though I was in Provincetown, lots of tourist stores, everyone was wearing a mask without exception. The town, put a lot of things in place. There were signs everywhere, masks mandatory, no questions. And even though we've sort of moved along in the COVID process that, masks are prettier, they're not as scary looking, they go with your outfit. More people are casual about wearing a mask. They don't mind as much. There's a return of, more laughter, more willingness to go in and out of a store, willingness to wait in line to go into your favorite store because that store can only hold 9 people right now. Even so, even having moved ahead in that and being somewhat more positive, the psychological impact for me, the psychological impact of seeing everyone masked, and I think the sort of muscle memory it brings up of every apocalyptic movie I've ever seen creates this low level of tension that by the end of the day just exhausted me.
Right.
And regardless of friendly shop owners and regardless of, people actually being polite to one another on the sidewalk again and actually talking to one another, even though they're wearing masks, so you can tell that people are smiling under their mask. Even with all of that, the overarching tension is so present. And so having that environment in your classroom where you get to talk about that and give space to your students to let some of that tension turn into constructive dialogue about it must just be a mental lifesaver right now.
I hope so. I've been thinking a lot about masks in particular in this situation of being an employee or a service provider of a business or interacting with other customers. I think there's been a lot of attention on masks, and most of it sort of at the political level. But I think, like you said, even for people who are very supportive consciously of the importance for public health of wearing masks and protective equipment, it's still in our culture where we kind of expect to like have some kind of friendly banter with people, and that's part of feeling like you belong at a store or community or as you walk down the street. Even if you support having a mask as a something to keep you safe or other people safe, it's still not comfortable, and it's still hard, and it's still something I think that business people who are trying to provide these services for people and experiences for people, they have to figure out how to take on that additional load of making people feel also comfortable and feeling like they belong, even in acknowledging that with all the safety precautions, there is sort of this psychological or cultural distance that's happening. And it's I noticed, and like you said, some of the signs that are up are sort of confrontational in some ways, like stay out, get out of here if there's no mask on your face, kind of a thing. But some of them, like in Amherst, I think the Chamber of Commerce put these up. They're like, these like really, I don't know,
Love
warm,
that.
fuzzy kind of things of like, we're all in this together, wear
Right.
a mask because we love each other. And
Yeah.
that doesn't always work for everybody. Some people like to be direct and to the point, but I think it
Sure.
gets to the point that there's like, that you have to sort of address both of those issues at the same time of
Yeah.
need to be socially connected and to like address the mental health of the community and the togetherness and to not be too divisive about it, but also at the same time being safe and you know also trying to keep your business and your employees viable and sustainable through this
Yeah.
time too.
Right.
But that
Right.
social piece and that connection piece, I think at first was not really something people were really thinking about because we were just trying to
Mhm.
make it through. But I think now that it's been
Right.
a few months,
Yes.
it's
Oh, what
like
a good point.
we're trying to figure out like, okay, how can we make this livable for
Yeah.
people?
Yeah. Sustainable in
So
its own way.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Um, I want to take a moment to encourage anyone watching. If you have questions for Matt, please feel free to ask them. For anyone just tuning in, we're talking to Matt Godfrey. He's a professor of marketing with Isenberg School of Management at UMass, and especially focusing on customer insights and the customer experience, which right now is front and center of
Yeah.
all things to a certain extent. So please feel free to ask questions. We do have a comment from Bruce Weinberg, who says super insightful and relevant. So thanks, Bruce. I'm so glad you feel that way. I totally agree, because these conversations really, for me, are always, they just make me feel calmer. I feel calmer when I'm in conversation with people about all the things that are happening. Because I think it's so easy, especially during COVID, it's so easy to get kind of locked into our own experience of something,
Right. Yeah.
and it can be tough to look ahead. And I know that not everyone is as into sort of talking it out, especially when it's all theoretical. But for me, it
Yeah.
helps me. So, um,
I've
and
seen I've seen a lot of interesting, just in the class, and I'm
yeah,
starting to, work with a couple other researchers on trying to understand the COVID, specific experience. But
mm,
in class, some of the observations and data students are bringing back from across the state kind of speak in some ways to this question we have about this sort of social connection issue, sometimes kind of being in conflict with the social distancing and safety and public health
mm,
aspects of it.
mm-hmm,
And you see, sometimes people like a service provider, they're not supposed to, but they pull down their mask to like smile at
right.
you or whatever. Or if you see another customer coming down the wrong direction in the grocery store aisle, do you say, "Hey, turn back, you're keeping me safe," or do you say, people, often will see someone saying, "Oh, don't worry, we're it's okay,"
Right.
and in some ways those are, you know objectively kind of dangerous behaviors, but I think that they also point to this importance of people trying to connect with each other. And so I think for me that's like the one of the really interesting challenges is how do we be safe but also feel like everybody can belong in these different kinds of
Yeah.
stores and places where they might go, um, and hopefully how do we not let the COVID situation drive us apart, even more culturally
Right.
or politically or however. But
Right.
I mean, it's a huge challenge, but it's something that's been on my mind a lot.
Yeah.
And like you said,
Yeah.
talking about it just does help to kind of like try to figure it out.
It is. It really, really does. So I have a question from Bruce. Bruce, thanks for asking your question. Um, Do you expect that consumers could possibly have more insights into creating interesting and viable consumer places or experiences, physical, virtual, or other types of places or experiences?
Well, I mean, I feel like asking people to talk about their experience, and then seeing how they live always provides insights that are often overlooked, with sort of like surface level, purchase data, or
Right.
data about where people shop online, and these sorts of indicators of what they do, but that aren't necessarily insightful in and of themselves.
Yeah.
But one thing that's always been a challenge for me as a researcher is that asking people about their experience is not always the best way to
Right.
really get at it, because we don't, so much of what we do is
Huh.
unconscious and taken for granted. We don't understand our own cultural biases because we were raised up in a particular background and whatever, and we don't know necessarily why we do what we do. It just
Interesting.
makes sense for us in that moment. But what's
Hmm.
interesting about COVID is that suddenly all those taken for granted ways of living and
Yeah.
being and doing got disrupted. And when those kind of disruptions happen, people, some of that unconscious stuff becomes more conscious. Um,
Hmm.
and so people now, I think, in talking to them, have a little bit more of an understanding of what's going on and how they're feeling and what they're experiencing. So it's a chance, I think, like the question was pointing out, that to ask people what their experience is like and see how they would imagine that experience in the future. And so I think it is a unique time when people can actually, maybe in some ways, better understand their experience and some of those taken for granted biases, or ways of living or shopping or interacting with other
Yeah.
people suddenly become a little bit less,
Habitual.
you
Yeah.
just can't continue doing them without thinking. So
Yeah.
that's something that I think is an opportunity for us to sort of grow and change through this.
Mm. Do you think that the ways to gather customer insights have also changed? I mean, compared to what had sort of become common tools of surveying and or, kind of behind the scenes algorithmic reading of
Yeah,
someone's habits, are there new ways that you could imagine engaging those insights from people?
I think that um, I think that those analytical tools and AI algorithms are going to become more prevalent, and because of that,
Sure.
more important in driving decisions. Not, I mean, in some ways, maybe for the better. In other ways, maybe not. But there are a lot of old tools that can be used. Ethnographic tools from anthropology and sociology, you
Hmm.
know, in-depth customer experience kind of interviews, and but I think maybe the new challenge or opportunity is to sort of bridge the the sort of the new algorithm world with the old school customer experience, lived experience, sociological or anthropological approach to understanding
Mhm.
people. Um, I think that the algorithm approach and the statistical approach aligns really well with like economic or psychological theories of behavior, where
Sure.
you can say like, okay, I put variable 1 and 2 into this equation, and then people, I can predict that they're going to do this with
Right.
some level of accuracy. But there's also that's not really a good way to understand how people feel about something, or
Yeah.
maybe to, when, I mean, culture always surprises us and we're caught off guard by cultural shifts that happen like at lightning
Mhm.
speed. And I think like right now those shifts are happening faster and faster, and so it's harder to use
Yes. Yeah.
predictive models when the experience is changing so quickly.
Right.
So finding a way to sort of bridge that quantitative uh, side of marketing research with the more culturally attuned sort of qualitative
Yeah.
approach could really bring,
Right.
hopefully, less biased algorithms,
Yeah.
models that can better, you know relate to the lived experience of a range of different people.
Right.
Hopefully
Definitely.
there's more of that sort of interdisciplinary sort of connections.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Um, and Bruce added just a little nuance to his question.
Mhm.
Um, could consumers increasingly be a valuable source, either through direct or indirect methods, of interesting and viable notions? So, building on
Mhm.
what you're saying already, is
Yeah,
there a way, I think this is so interesting what you're talking about, because it is a weaving together of predictive modeling and empathetic
yeah,
research
yeah,
almost. So how do we engage the consumer more directly?
right.
I don't know. This is a really, Bruce, thank you for bringing these questions up, because this is a really interesting, going back to that idea of cutting edge. This is where we are, right? Is how do we move forward out of, oh, I know what this person's going to think
Right.
or do, into how does this person's feeling, sense of safety, sense of need, you know, how does that impact
Yeah.
their behavior?
Yeah. I think I think that it's just a good starting point is just to seek out those voices that are
Hmm.
maybe different from the assumptions that as a business person you might make about who my target market might be. Who are the kinds of
Hmm.
people that shop here, and why do they do it? Or if you're a nonprofit or university or government, like why do people do what they do, and who do I serve and why? um, I think that just reaching out and listening to those voices is a good place to start. um,
Mm,
and of course, one person's experience doesn't
right.
relate to everybody, but
Sure.
it can be a starting point to kind of get you to think, um, and challenge those explanations that maybe you'd use to guide your decisions in the past.
Right.
And I think right now with social media and with the amount of voices that are out there, it actually becomes more accessible for people. I'm thinking about brands and companies or different organizations to find those voices and not discount them, but to see like,
Hmm.
well, why is it that like some people think my brand is this or that,
Right.
rather than saying, I don't need to worry about them. We can't be everything to everybody, but I think if
Sure.
you ignore that sort of cultural, um, I guess the river of culture that's sort of sweeping along, eventually something's going to come up and and push you in a direction where you don't want to go. And so just listening to different people's voices can be really helpful. And
Yeah.
there's so many different ways to collect data that from those voices you can then decide what kinds of people maybe you need to talk to, or
Hmm.
what kind of data set might be available where you could look into this question a little bit more carefully. But starting out just by, I think, listening to people's experiences that are different from your traditional happy
Right.
customer, or the person who lives next door, or things like that. I think in our personal lives, we need to do that too. I think to read people's perspectives that differ from us, whether it's like politically, culturally, whatever, and
Hmm.
read it from a sense of like, I want to try to understand where you're coming from, rather than I want to try to prove why I'm right to myself.
Yes.
Um,
Crucial
and
difference.
and it's really hard
Yeah.
to do that because it's
Yeah.
no one wants to be wrong, and but I think we all don't know things, so we can start there and say like, okay, what don't I know? And this
Hmm.
person knows at least how they live, and I don't know that, so
Yeah.
I can try to understand that a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, this brings up so many like this is why I'm fascinated by topics like this, just because they can go in so many directions. And when we get into conversations about social justice and what is kind of underlying all of
Yeah.
that. And you've mentioned a couple times in this conversation the concept of belonging and how
Yeah.
crucial that is. I think about belonging a lot in the context of placemaking, because one of the things, and this was very, very prevalent when I lived in Philadelphia and was doing this work in Philadelphia, there was an assumption already formed because of so much negative history that placemaking was tied to a direct idea of taking a place that already existed, changing it to suit white people or
Yeah.
whoever was
Yeah.
taking a financial interest in that place. Um, and there was an inherent destruction of belonging for one group
Yeah.
or some groups, and a creation of belonging that was brand new for
Mhm.
this new group. And so I'm curious in your research around
Yeah.
placemaking, and especially now as um, the social justice conversation is happening more front and center, finally, which is amazing. Um, how how do we sort of continue to break down and dispel that misunderstanding of placemaking and keep building a sense of placemaking as, and I'm overlaying it with my own
Right.
projection and thesis here, but continue building placemaking into the concept that a place exists already, has character, has history, has people, has community, and then we're going to add to that
Yeah.
place keeping rather than placemaking. For you and your research, how has that sort of
Yeah.
developed in this time, or at least moved forward with you through your work and research?
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge question, I think, for two reasons. Um, and the first is that, it's important not to push people out of places in order to create a place that
Right.
one certain kind of group feels like this is the kind of place they belong.
Yeah.
Um, and the second thing, though, is that the irony of it is that the sort of up and coming placemakers who are, often white, middle class, kind of, college educated people, um, they also ironically don't want to be part of like a gentrification scheme
Right.
or like push people out. Like it's the last thing consciously that they want,
Yeah.
but they do like, a fancy latte or whatever, and they can't
Right.
stop wanting that. And they also, want. I think if you go back into our history, and I'm from Canada originally, and the history is quite similar there. Maybe there are different um, groups who have, more or less power, but it's kind of the same history where there was sort of a suburban movement that sort of, or a modern movement that sort of made things efficient and clean and good for the sort of like ideal middle class looking American or Canadian.
Yeah.
Um, and then sort of as things progressed, that the tastes sort of changed of the middle class, and they felt that the kind of like bland, boring suburban life was no longer authentic, and they could look back and see in other countries or in like the inner city there was this kind of gritty, authentic sort of a way of living that they kind of felt like they missed out on, and so like that authenticity was so important, and they sort of seek it in different ways. And um, but the irony again is that, if placemakers sort of go in and try to create authenticity as they see it, then the original people who have been there and have been living their lives in such a way in that place for so long, the people who made that place authentic and desirable for these people with more, economic power to, or cultural power to come in there,
Mm.
If they leave, then suddenly the place is no longer authentic anymore. And
Right.
so it's not a sustainable
Right.
approach to placemaking. So some things that I've seen, that work to varying degrees is sort of a sort of a lighter handed approach to managing places.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Having places that are truly publicly accessible, and that don't require paid consumption, for example, is one way.
Yeah.
Having retaining, or at least like attracting, the kinds of establishments that have been in a place for generations, that are sort of a fixture of that place, um, to not totally change the sort of tastes that are, you know, served or provided for in that place. That it's a place where a diverse range of people can find something that they can connect with, and that hopefully they can sort of meet each other as people, and hopefully at more than a sort of a surface level. Um, Maybe one of the problems, and maybe this is ironic for me as a marketing professor talking about this, is that the irony is that a lot of that placemaking happens outside of, like business institutions.
Right.
A lot of it happens in schools, in parks, in like community infrastructure. So
Yeah.
I think that like placemaking businesses also should focus on making sure there's community infrastructure to keep the community there. And it's not just about who has the money to be able to sort of have their tastes, catered to in that
Understood. Yeah.
space. And I think overall, like it's a more sustainable way to build the community, because it's what, for the people who have money, it's actually a lot of times what they want is they want to be part of a diverse community, but uh, they don't really know how to do that other than shopping,
Right.
or buying things. And so there's got to be
Right.
other ways that complement the business side, I think.
Definitely.
um, those are some of the things I've started to see happen, but often because businesses have a bottom line, even like socially responsible businesses who like really truly want to create an accepting and open and integrated and space, because of trying to just survive economically, there's a tendency to sort of chase after that money.
Yeah.
But I think there's a way to sort of balance that, and I think that's the challenge that a lot of current contemporary placemakers are going to have to address. And hopefully,
Definitely.
bringing in the community as part of the planning force is important too. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
I think people are thinking about it and talking about it, so there's an opportunity to kind of reinvent how it happens. But uh,
Yeah.
it'll happen in outside of, not just outside of business and marketing, but in addition to sort of the business and marketing side of things, to have to
Right.
kind of work together.
Right. Yeah.
Hopefully,
Hopefully.
hopefully I can help. Hopefully I can help to understand this,
Yeah.
and for myself to try to figure out how to live, in
Yeah.
a more open sort of a way. I think is important.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I think your work and the work of your students is certainly helping and going to
So
continue
yeah,
to help all of us think about it and talk through it, think through it.
yeah,
I am into this idea of having, some of your students maybe come on here at the end of the semester and talk a little bit about
sure,
going
yeah.
from,
I'll introduce you.
yeah, that would be so cool because, I had a lot of fun last semester and
Uh-huh,
I'm
uh-huh.
excited to keep interfacing with students. And I think it's so interesting what you were just saying about, and I'm sort of taking it and carrying it on a little bit,
No, yeah, please.
but for me as a placemaker, that this whole process of COVID has been really digging into and refining what people are even able to interface with right now. And what came out of that, which will be again tested in a couple months, is that the outdoors became this crucial space that people were interacting in.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, being outside became the safe zone for everyone.
That's true. Yeah.
And, you know, outdoor dining on the business front, outdoor dining, you know, things out on the sidewalk, being able to shop for things that way. But more than that, for me, it became about public art. It became about spaces where you could interact with something, appreciate something, take something in your own time, in your own way, at your own pace, all of that stuff. And so going back to this question of, you know, especially around gentrification, how money and the sort of economic makeup of a space interacts with those parts of a space that are not about money, public
Yeah.
spaces where anyone can be, where anyone can enjoy, how those two things balance each other out and enable everyone in the community, ideally, to
Right.
stay there, live there, shop there, be there, you know, how to create more of a spectrum of spaces rather than constantly driving towards this one model of
Right.
spaces. And
Yeah.
so I agree, as a placemaker, it's definitely a time where we have an opportunity to point out the things that work for everyone
Right.
and lift those things up, because working for everyone right now has a whole different meaning in the time of COVID. There is an equalizing through this time that I think has been really important,
Yeah.
in sort of driving that conversation, because safety is safety, right? And addressing safety for everyone is a crucial subject.
Yeah.
So
There's been a lot of people, you know, bringing in a conversation, and like,
yeah,
even if like the money for development often comes sort of from the top down, we can sort of hopefully kind of invert that and put some power, you know, in a community-led thing where, you know, people of different social and economic and racial backgrounds can all
yeah,
sort of have a say, have some power in what's going on.
yeah.
And we're not, hopefully we can figure out what that looks like. And you're experimenting right now, you know, at
Yes.
the Mill District with that. So,
So much, so much. And it's really, I mean, the whole journey of the Mill District has been fascinating, and working specifically at this time,
yeah.
has really just been so eye-opening about what factors drove us before, and how we sort of continue to open up and expand our consciousness of who we're planning for, who we're building for, who we're hosting events for. I mean, I feel like this time that human beings are in has really come to be a test of how much can we hold and understand at one time.
Yeah.
And I love that. I think that's great. I think it's very challenging. And I think that there are definitely groups, that are being challenged that weren't accustomed to being challenged or
Sure.
questioned, which I think is a really crucial part
Yeah.
of everything.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Matt, this is so awesome.
This is fun.
I
Thanks for
so
inviting me.
I thanks for being willing to come on, because I know that this, you know, we might be in the third week of classes, but this is still a really busy time for you. So I so appreciate you coming on and stepping into a conversation about subjects that are very much in motion, which can be hard to talk about sometimes when everything is just evolving. So I really appreciate your time today.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me
Yes.
on.
And we're going to talk more about having your students on. Maybe we'll have you there for the first part, and then we'll kick you out. Who knows?
Yes. Yes.
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to working with you too on these
Yes.
issues. So we'll keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I look forward to it. So have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Really
you. Take
appreciate
care.
it.
Bye.
Bye.